Today's story takes place in India, and it's a heartbreaking story about a mother who loses her daughter, and it's all because of her evil mother-in-law, who does not allow her to take the daughter to the hospital. And yes, money was an issue here, and also a power play came into it. A little bit of a warning, this story is pretty sad, but guys, let's get into it. I've heard and read from infinite places that there's no bigger loss than the loss of your child. I never understood what kind of loss. Mental, emotional maybe. But don't people get over every loss of life eventually? No, they don't. When parents lose their child, they never get over it. They lose everything along with the ability to live. And I lost my sister 11 years ago, and my parents lost their first child. You would think my parents still had me. True, that's true. But I lost my parents along with my sister too, at least emotionally. It's been 11 long years since my parents survived. One sad day at a time. I turned 18 a few months back, and while I started my first year of college, I came across support groups and online communities which help you by sharing your stories. So here I am telling my parents' life story, especially my mother's. My name is Artie, and I belong to a typical narrow-minded Indian family. Our culture has its perks along with some age-old cons, which sometimes demand people's mental peace. And mental peace is very minimal price for Indians to pay. I was merely an 8-year-old child when my life turned upside down because of my dad. Well, my parents suffered a lot. Today I'm going to tell you the story. After a lot of convincing, my mother has agreed to narrate her struggle journey in her words as a first step towards healing, and like most Indian mothers, she's not internet friendly, so I'm going to be her writer for the story, with the highest hopes that she'll get some words of wisdom of how brave they have been through it all, and a sliver of hope that they can finally move on as karma has been served. My name's Devi. I married Atul when I was 20 years of age. Yes, it was an arranged marriage. My parents always wanted me to marry Atul. When my parents moved to Mumbai, Atul's parents were my neighbors. They had a beautiful big house and even a car back in the 70s when cars were known to be luxury. The extravagant lifestyle impressed my mother, and my father was a salesman and earned a decent living, but it was nothing compared to my father-in-law. He was a high-ranking government official, and I and Atul grew up playing together and finally got married when I was 20, even though we knew each other and liked each other a lot. It was an arranged marriage when my parents asked his parents for the marriage. Atul's mother was not very sure, but agreed after my father-in-law liked me and my parents. I still remember my wedding day, and my mother was on cloud 9, thinking I was going to be Bahu of such a reputed and well-off family. Both I and Atul are single children to our parents. I was a fresh graduate when I got married, and Atul had just joined a bank as a clerk after completing his graduation. Controversial to all the other arranged marriages back in time, mine and Atul's were perfect. We loved each other, and the odds just benefited us. He was doing well in his career with growth in his way, and I was flourishing too as a housewife. My mother-in-law slowly and gradually accepted me and now considered me to be a part of the family. We lived together in the same house, and I admired as a child. All 4 of us were a sweet family, but the best perk about my life was my father-in-law. He was a very supportive guardian. He never once made me feel like I'm his Bahu and always treated me like a daughter. 1 year after getting married, I was pregnant. And all of us were extremely happy by the news. That was a golden period of my life, when everyone important to me came together to feel the joy and, well, took care of my emotions and needs. I felt like the queen of my tiny kingdom. After I had my baby shower, I shifted to my parents' house and was supposed to stay there until my child was 4 months old. Rituals like these make me fall in love with our culture. My pregnancy and delivery both were smoother than I expected. 9 months later, I had my beautiful Asha. Atul and I already had names for both genders, and we, had our daughter. We named her Asha, which means hope. All my life, I was extremely fulfilled. I had small dreams and always found reason to be happy. I never wanted much out of life until Asha came along. Asha made me a mother and, well, who wanted everything for her daughter? All the luck, wealth, and love available in the world. I wanted it all for her. My parents were super happy, but my mother-in-law did not express much. Atul and I got to talking one day, and we just believed she might still be overwhelmed by her first grandchild. As I was with my mother after giving birth, Atul used to come to my place every day after work. My mother-in-law never did expect for the day I got discharged from the hospital. Postpartum is hard, and my emotions were all over the place, but I survived with love and help from everyone. My mother advised me not to read too much into my mother-in-law's behavior and enjoy my time, as Asha might grow up fast. And I did exactly that until the day came when I had to go back to my home. My in-law had to perform a small puja, and a ritual for the baby coming home was discussed before my delivery. But when I reached home, I realized nothing of the sort was happening. I instantly asked Atul what was going on, and he had to give up pretending and told me the most shocking truth for my ears. My mother-in-law was not happy with a girl child. I had never experienced this firsthand. Yes, we read stories in India and hear in the news and television that people do not like girl children, and usually the hatred reflects on the daughter-in-law. But I always believed that these stories were from my childhood and that the world had advanced in the last 20 years. Additionally, it was difficult for me to accept this side of my mother-in-law, because after the initial stages of our marriage, she has shown nothing but love to me. In some instances, her overly possessive nature towards Atul made it difficult. But that's a cup of tea for any Indian bahu. Except that there was never an issue, and nor did we discuss the gender of our baby after I was pregnant. I brushed off the worries and behaved normally at home, without complaining about her behavior, hoping she'll fall in love with the baby the same way we all are. Asha was the sweetest child. No fuss, no drama, just a happy child exactly like me. Atul used to tell me that she is my reflection, always with a smile on her face and no complaints. What we all expected did not happen, and my mother-in-law never liked Asha much. She did all the things a grandmother is expected to do. She loved her in public too, but it was the four walls of our home that reeked of unacceptance. After a while, we got used to it, and Asha turned 3. Once again, I got pregnant and was expecting our second child. This time around, the news did not create the wave of magic like it did the last time. My mother-in-law instantly asked for us to get the gender checked. I was scared, Atul was scared, and we feared the worst. I did not agree to take the test, but my decision ruined my house. Every day we had the same fight over and over until one day I gave up and asked Atul to take the test. On the way to the hospital, I was scared to even move. Asha was sitting in my lap in the car and innocently asked me, "Is Daddy angry at our baby?" I immediately began to cry, and so did Atul. I know everybody wonders why we did not leave our in-laws and live separately. Well, for one, that is not our culture, and 2, Atul did not have any siblings, and we knew they needed us more than they needed them. And we're just those people who cannot leave our parents if we want to live peacefully in society. We reached the hospital after what felt like the longest ride of my life. Gender reveal by then was an illegal act, so my father-in-law had arranged the gender exam through one of his friends. It's a girl. Update number 1. My mother started crying after she said the last sentence of her story. She was uncrossable. All the memories came crashing down on her, and I was so hurt by just looking at her feeling absolutely hopeless. So the last update on her life story was the revelation that she was pregnant again with a girl. We took a 2-day break before continuing the story as she needed time to process it. When the doctors excitedly revealed, "Congratulations, it's a girl," and a weird wave of anxiety shot down from my toe to my spine. I didn't know how to react at all. My heart was jumping up and down with joy, and my eyes were tearing up with emotion, and my head was denying any possibility of this happening again. I looked at Atul, and he held my hand so tightly that we did not need to say any words to each other. That hold transferred all the thoughts, and even he started to cry. We went home, and we don't have to say a word because my father-in-law had already asked for the report. They were just there to welcome us with cold stares and tension like we had been robbed. Well, according to my mother-in-law, we had been robbed of having a chance of an heir. The most hurtful communication happened, and the worst was said that night. We were asked to get the baby, well, get rid of it. My heart sank deep down in this emotional pool, which I did not even know existed. My heart sank deep down, and before I could muster up the courage to say anything, Atul raised his voice in anger at his mother and said, "This will never happen." To my shock, my father-in-law joined him and agreed. Yes, everybody had their own choices, but more often, my mother-in-law's last words were the final decision on any matter, and never once did anybody raise their voice to her. So this was naturally very astonishing for me and her. Atul looked at me with pure love and asked, "Do you mind another girl?" I smiled from tooth to tooth and said, "I can't wait to have one more Asha." We laughed and went to our rooms that night. The next morning when we woke up, our lives were changed forever. My mother-in-law stopped talking to us completely, and even Asha suffered. She did not understand at the age of 3 why her daddy was not taking her to the park anymore, or why she was keeping her away. Seeing Asha craving her grandmother's love made me hate her for the first time. What is it her fault for? She's just 3. Unlike my last pregnancy, which was flowers and rainbows, my pregnancy hardship was every day. I was not feeling that well physically, and mentally it was a war zone in my house. However, the suffering was just 7 months because this time I asked Atul to go to my mother for delivery. And he agreed because he knew how miserable I was here. My parents, on the other hand, were the happiest for my second baby, and when I left the house at 7 months old, my father-in-law visited me every week, and that gave me some survival strength for my future ahead. But even he was given the silent treatment for taking our side and denying the possibility of getting rid of the baby. Sometimes I wonder, how can she hate the idea of her grandchildren being female? She's a female, for goodness sake. And for boys to be born, we will need girls to be born. Our relationship changed drastically over the period of 9 months. As I grew, her hatred for our decision was growing alongside, and I delivered Artie, my beaming, beautiful baby girl. I asked the nurse to hand over the child to Asha first, and she jumped with joy, and Atul picked her up and placed her on the sofa. With her tiny little hands, she asked the nurse to give baby Artie in her lap. Well, when the nurse handed over the baby, Asha was looking at her with so much pride and protectiveness. That moment is still fresh in my memory, and it made me forget all the pain anybody had made me feel about having a baby girl. 3 months passed in a heartbeat. I love both my girls and cannot imagine having a boy instead of Artie. More than me, Asha is thrilled to have a baby sister and is completely in love with her. Asha is 4 years old and goes to play school in the morning. So our routine now is this. When Asha wakes up in the morning, she runs straight towards Artie and plays with her until she has to go to the play school. Once she's back, she spends all day taking care of her sister, and sometimes I don't even feel like I'm a mother of a 5-month-old child because I've had so much help, and sometimes Asha handles, Artie better than I can. Life was going good. Atul got promoted as a branch manager, and after 5 years of hard work, we were doing well as a family. My mother-in-law was not happy, and we did not expect much from her. On the other hand, my father-in-law became a doting grandfather. He spends almost all evening playing with the girls and taking them to the park. Artie did not know grandmother's love yet, but Asha did, and she sure used to miss her a lot. Sometimes she would even talk to her and tell her how much she misses going to the park with her, but all her efforts were in vain. My mother-in-law's love had turned into hatred, deep hatred for these beautiful girls. Whenever she saw them, it just reminded her of the 2 times she missed having a boy. Life went by with hatred burning in the home, and I asked Atul so many times that we just move out. But every time we came close to making the decision, either my father-in-law stopped us or the fear of society got into our heads. The next 6 to 7 years went by very fast. Asha and Artie have turned 8 and 11, when the most crucial life decision was about to be made. I got a call from the girls' school one morning, and the teacher asked if we could all come down to the school because Asha was burning up and needed to go home. So we rushed to the school, and I've never seen Asha so weak and pale. From school, we headed to the hospital, only to find out that Asha has a very high fever and the doctors need to run some blood tests and find out the cause. A few hours later, the blood reports came back, and Asha had dengue. Her platelet count dropped to 20,000. Update number 2. Asha was getting weaker by the day. When the reports came in, I asked Atul to admit Asha into the hospital, but all of them thought that it was just fever and can be treated at home. I knew my baby. It was not just fever. She was being eaten from inside. Her skin was getting whiter by the hour, and it felt like her intestines would collapse any time after constantly puking every 20 minutes. For the last 3 days, we've been treating Asha at home with the medications that the doctor recommended. My mother-in-law kept saying how Asha was being dramatic because she did not want to go to school. She refused for us to go to the hospital because she believed doctors just exaggerate small fevers to extract money from people like us. On the 4th day, I asked for help from my father-in-law, and to my shock, he said the exact same thing: I need to calm down, as this was just fever and nothing else. I knew nobody believed that Asha was faking her health, but fear of my mother-in-law was larger than my child's health. In the evening, when Atul came, I asked him firmly to help me take Asha to the hospital, or I will go by myself. Seeing my resistance, Atul agreed, and we went against my mother-in-law's will. When we were leaving, she kept shouting, "If you go to the hospital for such small things and waste away your money, don't come back to this home. You better find a place for yourself. You people are fools and blinded by your daughter." The screams became distant as we left. When we reached the hospital, the doctor looked at us like we were ghosts, in utter disbelief that we were standing in front of him. He started asking how long has she been sick like this, and when was the last day that we got her reports done. Asha, on the other hand, was puking her lungs out and burning up. The next half an hour felt like a slow-motion movie, where people are running from one ward to the other, getting everything done on Asha, and panic took over the entire staff. Up till the moment where the movie stopped. Everyone stopped. There was nothing but silence. Asha was gone. Our hope was gone. She's dead. I did not move for the next hour, and they took Asha away from the ward, but I'm still sitting on the waiting sofa in the same room. Atul's right beside me, equally in shock. We weren't crying. We weren't moving. We just sat there in disbelief at the situation. How could my child be gone in a mere hour? Gone forever? As the hospital staff knew my father-in-law, they informed him, and all our parents were here soon. My mother was hysterically crying, and I kept looking at her all dead. Emotions are a tricky business, you know. They don't come when you need them. I needed them at that moment. I wanted to cry. Wanted to just feel something, anything, to realize that my baby was gone. But all I felt was numbness and denial. It did not feel like anything was wrong. All the drama surrounded me, and we went back home. Atul started crying when we had to take Asha's body home for the rituals, and relatives were being informed that arrangements for a funeral were about to be made. I stood there at the corner of our house. Asha's body was lying there in the middle of our drawing room, and people started to walk in. Atul came to me and asked if I wanted to maybe change my clothes to something more funeral appropriate, and pointed towards my room. When I went to the room, I locked myself in and saw Artie sitting in the corner. She came up and hugged me tight, and I started bawling my eyes out. There's those emotions. It seemed like Artie's hug separated every piece of my body, and I felt pain. Pain I knew will never heal, and I was broken. My baby girl, my poor Asha, was gone. I looked at Artie, and I knew we would never be okay. Hey, this is Artie again. It's my turn to talk. Mom left the room after this part of the story, and she said she needs some space to absorb everything, and I understand. I don't remember much of Asha's childhood, and all were happy memories mostly, but now that I'm writing this, so many things are coming back to me. How Dottie used to hate me, and I never expected anything else because I was born with that hatred, but Asha had seen better, and it felt like she used to miss Dottie, loving her all her moments. The day when Asha left us is one of the most prominent parts of my childhood memories. That day we cremated hope of happiness from my family, and after that day everything changed. I'll keep you updated soon once my mom is okay to talk about this. Updates. Number 3. Sorry I've been missing for a month, but it's really hard to process grief, especially a grief that's consumed my whole family and changed our lives forever. My mother asked me to not write that story as she narrates to me and instead listen to all the things carefully and then put words on paper. So, this story is going to be from my narration. It was 12 days after we had the cremation ceremony for Asha, and all relatives were vanishing like dead flowers in the garden, one at a time. And soon we were all alone in the house. Now the 3 of us with Dottie and Dada. My mother had been awfully quiet for most of the days until someone asked her something about Asha and she would cry and leave the room. It breaks my heart to see my parents so helpless. The last of the relatives went home that evening. The evening that changed my family dynamics and declared us criminals. In the evening, my mother and I were in our room when my father came to take a shower. As long as my father was in the bathroom, my mother was pacing back and forth near the bathroom door. I could feel something restless brewing in the room, and what my mother said next to my father absolutely shocked me. You know, right, that you and your mother are responsible for my child's death. My father froze there at the bathroom door and could not move. As soon as he realized the magnitude of her words, he started sobbing and saying sorry, like he was on repeat, like a parrot. I did not understand what was happening, but I had never seen my father so weak and inconsolable. My mother did not react to my father's tears. Instead, she grew stronger with each tear that dropped and demanded justice. She was headstrong and warned to walk out with me if he did nothing about what happened to Asha. The next day, my father and mother were locked in the room for most of the morning and then went out into the city, asking me not to tell anything to grandparents about yesterday's communication. I nodded, because for the most part, I did not even know what was happening. They returned late in the evening, but not alone. My maternal grandparents were with them, and a guy, in his mid-40s, who was a stranger to me. Something had changed in my parents' mannerisms that were not just helplessly hurting people anymore. They were onto something. All the adults sat in the room, and the stranger was an advocate. My parents had filed a complaint about my mother-in-law. They claimed Asha died because of her torture and negligence regarding her health, to which the lawyer replied that it's an act of attempt to murder. As we heard the word murder, the room went silent. My mother was crying in her eyes. Tears flowed down her cheeks, but there was no sound. Dadu got up and asked the lawyer to leave and looked at my parents with such angst and anger mix. The lawyer stood up and left the notice on the table and asked my parents to call him after they had the discussion. Dadu was so angry at my parents for pulling such a drastic step and started rationally explaining what happened to Asha. For my mother, everything was falling onto deaf ears, and she kept nodding in silence and did not even look up once. My maternal grandfather stopped my dad and told him to face reality, to see that Asha was long gone because of my Dottie's hatred for the girls. Well, my Dottie was awfully quiet until my father spoke up and said,
I can't believe how my mother did this to my child. I wish I could have done something and listened to Devi. I could have saved my child if I wasn't afraid of society. Enough is enough. After my father said this, my daddy asked my parents to leave the house and never come back. They obliged. That night we went to my maternal house and all 4 adults were sitting right there and sitting when I woke up. They were awake the whole night, rationally calculating their next move. The news of my parents doing a case on my grandmother spread like wildfire in no time. My parents were prepared for all the backlash they were about to face, but did not care at all. My mother always cried, saying, "It's too late. We should have done something when Asha was around." No matter how much prepared my parents were, my grandparents were much more powerful and financially capable of tackling this. And, well, in India, money is much bigger proof than truth. The following week, my father lost his job without an explanation in the world, and for my maternal grandparents, it was getting difficult by the day to step out of the home. I remember I was bullied in school, saying my parents were opportunities and wanted to extract money from my grandparents by simply blackmailing them. My parents fought for the next 2 long years, going to court, surviving through their savings because nobody in town was ready to give my father a job and school was getting so hard for me. But the fight for my parents was much more important than their present. There were so many times when the lawyer my parents hired would get threats to not do this to my parents. I was 10 by then, and I could see my parents struggle because of my grandparents, and my hatred for them had absolutely reached its peak. There were not any exceptions for my daddy, but this time around my dada was helping her. He came by the house once or twice during the 2 years of legal wars with soft blackmail and little concern. He explained how my father is an only child and they're on the verge of death. He should not channel his grief into revenge and settle into the home. Plus, he would always mention how my parents should think about me and not take such drastic steps if they wanted to be a part of this society. All their attempts failed and my parents did not withdraw the case. My parents seek help from all the influential society members who were not connected to my dada, and some of them sympathize with my parents, but never lent a helping hand at all. Once a social worker finally agreed to help my mother, and that's when our case got a lot of local media coverage. It was almost 3 years, but justice was served. The hospital staff and a few of my good-hearted relatives and even the doctor testified in our favor, and my grandmother was given punishment. 15 years. Inside of a jail cell. Attempted murder. The day was the last when we saw her, and my grandfather lived alone in their big home, and we moved to the city. My father found a job in Pune, and we rented a small house in the city. During COVID, we got news in the year 2021 that my grandmother passed away because of complications with the virus. Alone, in a hospital bed, with nobody by her side. And because of the pandemic, nobody could see her in her final days. They cremated her by the government official, and she never came back to the house. She spent so much time hating us girls, and I miss my sister every day. We pray for her together every night before bed, and we've created this small and simple life here in the new city, and my mother feels comfort in knowing karma served a grandmother what she deserved. She left without feeling the warmth of her loved one in a cold hospital bed. Our lives changed the day Asha left, and it'll never be the same again. But our love for her will always give us strength.
Okay, so let's go ahead and discuss this. The comment section was absolutely ripping Dottie apart, OP's mother-in-law. So I just want to know, from your perspective, what would you have done? I mean, this was a heartbreaking story, and if you're in OP's position, apparently going against the mother-in-law and Indian culture is a huge no-no. Well, it turned out that a baby was lost because of this. So I really want to know what you guys would have done, having found out later on that, unfortunately, your daughter passed away. So drop your comments down below, guys. Let me know exactly what you thought about this story. If you guys are new to the channel, my name's Mr. Reddito. I release a story every single day. And don't worry, not all the stories are sad and emotional. Some are drama-filled. Some include mother-in-law dramas, wedding dramas. You name it, we cover it. So, if you weren't really a fan of the sad type of story, don't worry, we cover a lot. So hit that subscribe button. I will see you guys tomorrow. And just remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya.